Hello class, this is our first context lesson for Catching Dreams, where you're going to learn a little bit about Native America. So just reviewing our information core, our content is birth and infancy. The culture we're speaking about is Native Americans. We are making dream catchers. The time period we're focused on is 1850 to 1900, and the location is the Northwest or Great Plains states. The dream catchers were made for spiritual protection, and the process is a weaving process known as netting. So, essential questions: what is a Native American? What does the word indigenous mean? What's the history of Native Americans, and where are they today? And over on the right here, you see an early photograph of a Native American extended family. You will notice that there is one fellow in the back that is wearing Anglo wear or Western wear, and the rest are dressed in traditional dress. The infants are on cradle boards, and they are swaddled and wrapped. So Native Americans are people who are indigenous to the lands of Americas. They're known as American Indians or First Nations, Amerindians, Native peoples, indigenous peoples, or original peoples. And over here on the map, you're seeing the traditional cultural areas of the Americas. These are Native Americans all the way up from the North Pole down to the very tip of Chile. Indigenous is a term used for the first human inhabitants of an area. It means that they are people that are native to an area, and this term was created long ago in order to differentiate or mark the difference between native people / indigenous, colonials, which would be people that would be coming in from other countries to colonize, people that were enslaved, and also displaced people, because sometimes people are forced out of their homelands into other lands, and so they don't fit the other categories, because colonials are there with intention, enslaved people are there because it's not their choice, and displaced people are just kind of pushed there. And native people are the original people. And on the right, you see this illustration that is the romanticized version of colonial interaction with Native Americans, otherwise known as Thanksgiving, where you have the colonists and the natives are just kind of shown as sitting around or kind of standing around, while the colonists kind of explain things to them and give them, cookies. This idea is very prevalent in the past, and it's something that needs to be addressed because it's not correct. So Native Americans are people that are native to all of the Americas, from the North Pole to the tip of Chile in South America. And most of the time, though, when people speak of Native Americans, they mean the indigenous people of North America, in particular the United States. In Canada, they are mostly known as First Nations. And then as you travel southward towards Central America and South America, that's when they become original peoples or native peoples or something similar. Again, this is an illustration dating from a previous time period where Native Americans from all over were just kind of grouped together in this illustration. Most people, when they think of Native Americans, though, they think of this guy with the big feathered hairdress and the typical kind of Native American things, or this guy. Those are stereotypes or representative of one aspect of Native America, but not all of it. The roots of Native America: the first Native Americans were hunter-gatherers, and they were thought to have crossed the land bridge from Eurasia. And when you're a hunter-gatherer, that means that you move around with the seasons, you move with the herds. Everything that you eat and use, you find. You don't farm, you don't herd animals, you hunt the animals, and then you forage for plant products and other things. Even though they did not have agriculture, they still developed complex civilizations, huge trade routes, built cities, earthworks, and developed ceramic, metallurgy, and weaving technologies all while on the go. Some became agricultural societies, mostly in the Southwest under the influence of Mexico and South America, where they developed agriculture first on this part of the world. But a lot of them still remain nomadic hunter-gatherers, in part because their climate wasn't suited to agriculture. Over on the right, you are seeing one of the things left behind by early Native Americans. This is something we're studying in the honors class right now. It's the Hopewell tradition, which was the largest trade route in the continental United States. They were nomadic, but they still built the largest city that existed in the world before colonial Philadelphia. On the right is one of their leftovers. It's the Snake Mound in Ohio. That's an egg, that's the head of a snake, and the body of the snake travels through here. And all of those curves on the snake and the mouth of the snake have specific alignments with constellations and the rising and setting of the moon throughout the year. So it's a giant calendar similar to Stonehenge. Native American population decreased dramatically after colonization. When the first colonists arrived to North America, they brought with them diseases from Europe that Native Americans did not have immunity to because they hadn't developed it yet. You can maybe kind of understand this in our current context where COVID came to the United States, nobody had immunity, and a whole lot of people died. But this kind of continued on, and it was furthered along by gifts of blankets that were infected with things like smallpox. It was also increased by war and the encroachment of settlers, because the colonial perspective, and you might have learned about Manifest Destiny in history class, was that it was the job of the colonists, the Anglo-Americans or white people, to kind of teach the rest of the world how to live, and that all land that they didn't own was up for grabs, even though somebody else was living there. And then Western expansion, particularly during the 1800s, brought genocide and changes to Native Americans. And over here on the right, you see a contemporary, meaning from that time period, illustration of a battle between the U.S. cavalry, and that is kind of General Custer in front, white hat, long blonde hair, and Native Americans. So let's look about their lifestyle. Their life on the Plain States means that they lived in areas that are now the states of Wyoming, North and South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, parts of Missouri, Texas, and Colorado. The climate there are very cold, harsh winters and hot, humid summers. In the wintertime, the temperatures dip below zero, and there is a lot of snow and permafrost. So it's very difficult it would have been very difficult for them to develop sustained agriculture on these areas. The land itself is flat. It has low mountains and canyons and valleys, but like you see in the picture here, it's, pretty much a flat kind of area. The vegetation is grass and scrub and smaller trees. This was really good for the megafauna, the wildlife that included bison or buffalo, elk, deer, wolves, cougars, and other smaller animals. Everything that you could pretty much think of. Bears. So the life on the plains, they were nomadic hunter-gatherers, and they traveled by foot until the horse was introduced. They did domesticate the dog early, and the dog was also used to pull things. But when horses were brought to the Americas in the 1600s, that really changed things. Some of the horses escaped or were let go and started breeding and created the herds of wild horses, and that made a big difference. The Native Americans, they followed the game meaning animals they hunted, and they lived in portable shelters like the teepee. They were organized into tribes, which were associations of families led by a chief. In the image over here in the background, you can see the teepees. You can see that this is the time period where they have horses, of course, and what they are doing is dragging a travois. A travois is basically made from a dismantled teepee. You have the lodge poles and then the outer covering, which was sewn together hides that are then wrapped around it to create kind of a platform for carrying things. And then you would ride or lead the horse with its stuff. The religion is pantheism, which is the belief in guiding spirits or gods. Spirituality is the connection of the person, the land, and the spirits. So it's a religious thing that includes the group, but it's also a very personal kind of connection. And part of that connection is their dreams, which is the connection to the spirit world where the spirits communicate with you. There are holy men or medicine men. A lot of times you'll hear them referred to shamans. Shaman is really a holy man of a very specific Russian tribe, but it's become a general purpose word, and they were the spiritual leaders. But the elders and ancestors were also extremely important and as sources of wisdom and guidance, and they were also guiding spirits even after they died. What you're looking at over here on the right is a sky burial. It was very common on the Plain States to do this. They are logs with a platform, and then the deceased person would be put on top of that platform, and then the people would move on. This was both for spiritual reasons about not wanting to put the body into the earth, because that might hamper the spirit from leaving, and it also might be insulting to the earth. And also Native Americans' views on death are very different than ours. It varies from tribe to tribe, but some of the that I have personal experience with, which is the Dene or Navajo out west, you don't refer to dead people. You don't talk about them. You don't say their name. You don't touch them. Even their police carry gloves so that they don't have to physically touch a dead body. And this is because of the spirit. The Chindi may transfer to you if you are around or speaking of that dead person. In other words, it's kind of like being haunted or cursed, but not quite. It would be disrespectful and considered to be trapping the person here if you talked about them all the time by name. So instead you would refer to them as something as the person who was my brother. They're buried, but the whole idea of Western cemeteries with tombstones and things like that was not something that was common until there was Christianity brought in, and those beliefs might have been adopted. So babies and infants, they stayed constantly with their mother because of a mobile society, and little ones, pre-walkers, would spend most of their time in this thing. This is a cradle board. Sorry about the bell. And babies, and this was done across the board with babies, were swaddled. And swaddling is you take a big cloth and you wrap it around the baby. The cloth is packed with absorbent things like soft grass or cotton or milkweed, something of that nature, because remember, diapers didn't exist, and that way it would absorb anything. It would also keep the baby very warm and be easy to change. And then the baby, the white part here is the blanket. You can see it's a quilt, and they're swaddled in the quilt, and then they're put on the cradle board, which was laced together. And you can see it has a little canopy, a little roof on it, and then that could be worn on the back like a backpack whenever they were walking around. It could be leaned against something to stand up so baby could watch things, and things of that nature. The babies were considered to be extremely important and protected and loved, to the point where parents did not discipline their children. And that seems a little odd, but one of the perspectives is that a parent will always be too soft on their child. So children instead were disciplined by their aunts and uncles, which carry a very important place in the tribe. So while the parents would love the child and have a lot to do with the child, it was up to these other relatives to sort of provide the discipline and raise the child. Native lands in time, the concept of owning land did not exist at this time. Nomadic societies were in movement. They had territories, but they didn't own the land, so they did not really understand what it meant to, I'm buying this land. And time as we measure it by hours and minutes and numbers didn't exist. Instead, it was cyclical, so it flowed the events depending upon seasons and sunlight and things of that nature. They had set times to do things, but they were more based on natural phenomena rather than, it's 6 o'clock, let's go, which is why we have the whole daylight savings mess. So your assignment for this is to take a road trip. You need your Chromebook, and I have Google Maps linked, and you're going to search for one of these reservations. There's lots of reservations, and you'll find out more about those tomorrow. But I want you to go ahead and look at one of these. This is the Fort Peck Indian Reservation, Standing Rock Indian Reservation, Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, or Rosebud Indian Reservation. Just Google that right into Google Maps, and then use the satellite view where you see the land instead of roads, and zoom in on the area and take a screenshot of what you see. For example, I use the Crow Reservation, which is not one of yours, but you can see there are a few things worthy. There are mountains. That's what mountains look like. Those very geometric looking square shapes are agriculture. They are controlled lands. And then you have forests. You have the Bighorn River, which is going to be talked about tomorrow in the context of Little Bighorn, which was also associated with Fort Smith. All right, and all you have to do is upload your screenshot. That's it.